Tonight on All In. Saturday, they turned their back on the mayor at a funeral. Today,
the Honorable Bill de Blasio. Thank
you. We'll have the latest on the ongoing clash between the mayor and the police of New York City. All eyes were on New York Mayor Bill de Blasio today as he addressed 884 new officers graduating from the New York Police Academy. The ceremony, of course, coming just 2 days after de Blasio's relationship with the NYPD reached a new low. On Saturday, as the world watched and as the mayor was delivering a eulogy for murdered police officer Rafael Ramos, hundreds of officers outside the church turned their backs to his image on a jumbotron. The openly contemptuous gesture was jarring at such a solemn and overwhelmingly sad occasion. And it came after de Blasio had called for a pause in the protests around policing till the two officers, slain more than a week ago, were finally laid to rest. The gesture from New York City Police marked the second time in recent days the mayor was publicly rebuked by some rank-and-file patrolmen and their union leadership, after the president of one police union explicitly blamed de Blasio for the two officers' murders, saying the mayor had blood on his hands. Given that fraught context, what happened at the police academy graduation today turned out to be fairly tame. De Blasio taking the podium to a smattering of boos mixed with applause.
The mayor of the city of New York, the Honorable Bill de Blasio.
Thank you. Congratulations, officers. It is an honor to call you officers. You have reached this moment in your lives through hard work, and I want to congratulate you all.
While a handful of audience members reportedly turned their backs on the mayor, the overall response appeared to undercut the narrative advanced by some police union leaders and some of City Hall's critics that de Blasio has completely lost the confidence of his entire department. For one, he appears to retain the loyalty of his police commissioner, Bill Bratton, who appeared beside him today and who has become something of an emissary between the mayor and the police. In an interview yesterday with CBS News, Bratton attempted to strike a careful balance between his boss and his officers in the NYPD.
That funeral was held to honor Officer Ramos, and to bring politics, to bring issues into that event, I think was very inappropriate, and I do not support it. At the same time, it is reflective, unfortunately, of the feelings of some of our officers that at this juncture, about not just the mayor, but I think about some of the many issues that are afflicting this city at this time in this particular police department.
Tomorrow, Mayor de Blasio will come face-to-face with some of his biggest critics in the NYPD when he meets with leaders of all 5 New York police unions, including the man who says he has blood on his hands for the murder of those 2 officers. Joining me now, New York State Assemblymember Brian Kavanagh. He's a founder of the New York chapter of State Legislators Against Illegal Guns, represents the district here in Manhattan. How are you?
Great, thanks.
Your father's a police officer.
He's a retired police officer.
Retired police officer.
He served for 33 years.
You served for 33 years. You grew up in Staten Island, which is basically copland here in New York.
Yes, it is.
It's a borough with a high density of police officers. Police culture suffuses it. What did you think of that moment on Saturday?
Well, let me just first say I do currently represent for your viewers a district in Manhattan,
right.
Which is a very diverse district. But you know, I do think that it was an unfortunate moment, as the police commissioner said, to express a point of view about the mayor. It's a funeral. It's a very tough time for our police department and for our city. I think the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers understand that that's a time to stop and pause from politics and honor the memory of this officer who has died. There'll be another funeral coming up soon. And again, I think it's unfortunate. I'm not going to tell any individual police officer how to feel about the mayor or about the funeral, but I do think it's unfortunate to choose that as a moment to express what is essentially a political point of view.
Do you think there's a kind of, I mean, obviously this is an analogy that's flawed in certain ways between the military, the United States military, and police officers in the New York City Police Department for a million different reasons. There is this sort of idea of civilian control, right? That it's sort of important for the people in uniform who are sort of defending the public for it to be clear for whom they work, right, in a sort of democratic republic. And this seemed, in some ways, and some people I've read interpreting as almost a rebuke to that. Like, you don't control us, like, we do what we want to do.
I don't want to overstate that. I do think it is important that police officers understand that they need to respect the democratically elected civilian leadership of this city. I think it's obviously also important that those of us in elected office and the general public respect the police for the job they do. It's an extraordinarily difficult job. It happens that in New York we have a police department that is in many ways the envy of the world. It is a police department that has played a huge role in reducing crime levels in New York to levels that just were unimaginable not so long ago. And incidentally, it is one of the most diverse police departments in America. And so when I see police officers suggesting that, you know, the elected leadership of the city is sort of adamantly opposed to their interests, that really concerns me. It also concerns me when I see protesters saying, you know, suggesting that the NYPD is synonymous with terrible things or racism or anything else. We do need to tone down the rhetoric on both sides. We need to understand that it is not, the fact that the police represent us, that they serve on behalf of us, is both why we respect them so much and also why we have to demand accountability.
Well, a lot of people don't feel represented. I mean, that's precisely the issue, right? I mean, and in terms of what you said about reducing crime, I mean, this is what's so remarkable, right? Incredible historical reduction in crime. Right. Which has seen a bunch of different errors of different policies put into place, and the crime keeps going down, including essentially the dramatic reduction of stop and frisk, which police commissioners were pointing to as the reason for the decline in crime. Stop and frisk have gone down, crimes have gone down at the same time.
I think it's important to recognize that stop and frisk was a sort of late in the game tactic deployed
yes.
on a large scale by the NYPD after almost a quarter century of year-on-year crime reduction. It was a police department that was trying particularly to get more and more guns off the street. We've had a tremendous success in New York at reducing gun violence by reducing guns, and there were a few years where that tactic was tried on a massive level. That was found to be unconstitutional. It was a campaign issue during last year's campaign. It's also important to remember it was a policy of the police leadership. It was not a policy implemented by rank-and-file police officers on their own accord.
Can I ask you this? In terms of the turning the back, blood on his hands, I still can't figure, what did Bill de Blasio do? I mean, what exactly? I mean, was it the speech after Garner when he said we had to talk to my son Dante about how he might interact with him? Like, what exactly did he do that makes people that upset at him they would do something that dramatic? I
cannot speak for angry police officers per se. I've talked to a lot of police officers. I'm related to some police officers. But I would say that there have been a lot of voices in the city that are trying to suggest that you need to be in either one camp or the other. You need to be with the police or you need to be against the police. The tabloids have magnified that point of view every day. They've suggested that the mayor has said some terrible things, that he's done some terrible things, many of which he just those reports are just plain false. Every time some crazy person out there says something bad about police officers, it's got a decent chance of being on the front page of the Post. And so you've created this siege mentality. It is dangerous for a society like ours to have a police department that is not trusted by our community because they will be less effective at law enforcement. And it is dangerous for police officers to feel afraid. We want to reduce the tension. We want to reduce the extent to which police feel attacked unjustly. And we also want to bring about a level of accountability that we think is reasonable.
Assemblymember Brian Kavanagh, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Same here.
As bad as things are right now between Bill de Blasio and the NYPD, this is not the first time we've seen New York police revolt against the city's political leadership. This is very important. As de Blasio's office pointed out to reporters today, both of his mayor's two predecessors, Michael Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani, were booed by audiences at police academy graduations. When it comes to liberal mayors' attempts to reform the NYPD, this is far from the worst response by the police unions. In 1992, when Mayor David Dinkins proposed just creating an independent civilian agency that would review alleged NYPD misconduct, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association convened a protest of around 10,000 off-duty officers at City Hall, which the New York Times called the most unruly and angry police demonstration in recent memory. According to the Times account, some of the officers, quote, mounted automobiles, began a raucous demonstration, denting the cars, while several thousand officers marched to the Brooklyn Bridge, blocking traffic in both directions. And the uniformed officers on site did, quote, virtually nothing to control the crowd. As recently as 2011, New York police officers rallied in anger around a group of colleagues who were indicted on over 1,600 criminal counts from ticket fixing to attempted robbery. The officers carrying signs, chanting slogans against the district attorney and then police commissioner Ray Kelly, reportedly blocking and even shoving members of the press. That's Mr. Lynch right there, who you've seen in the headlines recently, all of which gave the unfortunate impression that officers held themselves above the law and against the political leaders elected by the public to set police policy. Joining me now is columnist and editorial board member of the New York Daily News, Harry Siegel. This context strikes me as pretty important. This is the New York City police unions going to war against the mayor is more the norm than an anomaly.
That's right. You forgot in 1992 the racial slurs that were openly and widely hurled by cops. It's a more diverse department now, but this stuff gets ugly. In the 70s, there were flyers and other things put out telling tourists, don't leave your apartment, you'll get killed. Fear City was one of them. A judge blocked that. They put out a follow-up called Who's Next? Literally, they had off-duty officers passing these out and saying, don't leave your hotel, you will be raped, killed, robbed, and die.
Wait a second. New York City police officers off-duty with a flyer saying, who's next, walking around to unsuspecting tourists coming up and saying, hey, I'm a New York police officer, I'm off-duty, don't leave your hotel, you will probably be killed.
Correct. Correct. So the police like to present themselves because they're civil servants and because of the job they have as like the last line between society and anarchy. But that's a lot harder to do in an incredibly safe city.
Right. That strikes me as a really interesting question here. Is that the context that brings bringing all this to a point? I mean, you got the national context of Ferguson, a huge discussion about race, policing, police accountability. People killed, unarmed black men killed at the hands of police. Eric Garner, obviously. Then you've got Bill de Blasio, who ran on this campaign. That was just a basic kind of policy reform campaign. It was no fire-breathing campaign about bring down the NYPD, right? And then you've also got the fact that the city just gets safer and safer every year. You know, no matter what policies are put in place. Do you think that partly the NYPD worries that people are going to take them for granted?
Well, the environment shifted. After 20 years of being applauded for this drop, there suddenly, isn't it time to ease up? Do we still need aggressive policing? And the honest answer is the police don't entirely know. They don't know exactly what brought crime down, and they don't know what could change that dynamic, and that's really worrisome. But the interesting thing is this has gone farther than the union leadership wanted. They didn't want that to happen at the funeral. It was about 200 cops out of 25,000. They were outside at a monitor. They riled up their crowd. And things went just past where they wanted. The two unions that have been the most aggressive have contracts coming up. Pat Lynch has an election next year.
And they've got a meeting tomorrow, right?
That's
what is
right.
that meeting going to be like?
It's going to be, I think it's going to be a real cooling off. It's noteworthy that it's not just the 5 cop unions, that other big labor players are also going to be there. And I think it's a sign for all these institutional players, okay, let's take a breath and a step back and see if we can't reach some sort of workable dynamic here. Look, cops complain a lot. Mullins, the head of the Sergeants Union, who earlier this year said, threatened a work slowdown openly, which is illegal in New York, after de Blasio changed the pot policy in a very sensible way.
Yes.
And the same guy threatened a work slowdown because of Kelly and stop and frisk. He called it a quota. So they go on, but the truth is we're going to end the year with record low murders, record lows in most major crimes. Police are still doing their job, and a lot of this is noise, and it's gotten a little nastier than I think even the unions wanted.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. This is the end of the first year for Bill de Blasio. What direction this takes next? It's a fascinating sort of political experiment being run by the mayor here in New York. Harry Siegel, thank you.